Hello and welcome to Disability Inclusion 101. This session is defining disability. We are so excited to have you here, so let's get started. Today, what we will talk through is understanding and honoring the nuances and intersections of disability as an identity group. Today, you will be led by your facilitators. First is myself, Ashley Ullman, and I will be joined by my colleague, Allie Strong-Martin. A few things that we have on the list to accomplish with you all today. We will talk briefly about LifeWorks. We will dive into some definitions, defining disability, and then we will create space at the end for us to all move forward. So about LifeWorks. At LifeWorks, our mission is to serve our community and people with disabilities as we live and work together. We have three primary service lines that we do that through. We have self-directed services, employment services, and day services as well. The neat thing about that is that we work with folks from all different backgrounds who have all different visions for their life and their future. And the great thing about the work that we do is that we are able to meet people where they are and work towards the future and the lives that they want to live. A couple of things we also like to share is our community collaboration over the years. So LifeWorks was founded in 1965 by parents. We started partnering with community folks right from the beginning. Moving forward, we started working on employment and offering employment services. And since then, we have partnered with over 400 employers. In addition to that, we have worked alongside 600 and counting community organizations in different ways over the years. We have the honor of being supported by more than 800 donors, and we could not thank each and every one of you, from individual donors to large corporate sponsors, et cetera. The list goes on, but without you, our work would not be possible. So thank you so much for that. And of course, moving forward, we always like to share that there are a number of different ways that you can stay connected with LifeWorks. You can sign up for our newsletter. You can follow us on Facebook, on Instagram, and of course, on our website at www.lifeworks.org. So I will kick it over to my colleague, Allie, who will now take us through the middle section about defining disability.
Thank you, Ashley, for that introduction. And hello, everyone. Like Ashley said, I'm Allie Strong-Martin, and I'm happy to be here with you in this session. So this section of this presentation is on defining disability. And as we do so, we are going to ensure that we acknowledge and honor human variation, because that is what disability is. It's a natural part of human diversity and a natural reflection of human variation and human differences. So what exactly is a disability? The word disability has many different definitions, and the term disability encompasses a really diverse range of people, including but not limited to those who live with physical, mental health, learning, sensory, neurodevelopmental, and cognitive disabilities. And so on this screen here, we have just a few of those categories. Again, the list is pretty extensive, and this is not an exhaustive list of what it means to have a disability. But these are just a few of the examples. For example, physical disabilities might impact a person's mobility. Mental health disabilities include examples like anxiety or bipolar disorder. Learning disabilities impact at least one psychological process involved in understanding. And sensory disabilities impact how a person gathers information from the world around them using their senses. And so when we talk about just a few of these examples, We do want to make sure to state that not all disabilities are visible. You cannot tell whether or not someone has a disability just by looking at them. There are many of these examples that we gave and many, many others that we could talk about for a long time. Many disabilities are not apparent, or they are invisible disabilities or chronic illnesses. And so before, again, we keep moving forward, we do want to create a shared understanding of what disability is, largely in response to what we see that disability is not, but that is upheld commonly by society. So we want to challenge what is commonly upheld by society. So first of these grounding understandings or definitions is that disability is normal, and that it's, again, a natural part of human variation and diversity. Disability is absolutely an asset to our communities and to our workplaces, our neighborhoods, schools, etc. And disability is caused by disabling societal factors and not by individual differences of bodies or minds. Secondly, disability is a lived experience, and people with disabilities are a very diverse identity group. There's no two people who experience disability the same way. And furthermore, people with disabilities are not a monolith. We are leaders, parents, fashion icons, comedians, coworkers, athletes, activists, romantic partners, and the list goes on and on. Thirdly, we recognize that disability is intersectional. So first, that means that people with disabilities make up one of the only identity groups that any person, regardless of their race, their gender identity, their age, their sexual orientation, their religion, etc., it makes up one of the only identity groups that any person can join at any given time at any point in their life. And that makes the group of people with disabilities, the identity group, again, this really diverse and intersectional group of people. And we also like to say that disability is something that most of us will experience at one time or another if we haven't already in our lives. So if we live long enough, we will likely experience changes to our bodies, to our minds, to our memories, and that we'll just need different levels of support throughout our lives. So for that reason, instead of calling non-disabled people able-bodied, we typically use the term non-disabled, or we say non-disabled people are temporarily able-bodied. And so quick specs on disability by the numbers. If you don't already know, there are over 1 billion people worldwide who have a disability. That's globally approximately 1 in 7 people. And that translates to, in the US, there's over 61 million adults who are estimated to have some form of disability. And that estimate is about 1 out of every 4 adults. So again, we see that disability is really common. People with disabilities live and work all around us. If you don't think you know someone with a disability, you probably already do. And disability is, again, a really common part of the human experience, and we can't say it enough that it's a natural part of human diversity and human variation. And so with that, in this section about defining disability, we do want to also define some hot topics that are important for us to unpack as we work in these spaces, or if we're a community partner in these spaces. So people who are marginalized live in a society that's filled with stereotypes and prejudice that's intertwined within their day-to-day lives. Organizations and individuals need to confront the areas below if we want to offer help. And so these areas that we're going to talk about, just very briefly, we could give a day-long presentation on them, I'm sure, but we are going to dive into just briefly to stigma, privilege, tokenism, and savior complex. And so stigma is defined as entrenched ideas and concepts that can negatively impact policies, decisions, and platforms that shape and construct social environments. Stigma impedes people with disabilities' capacity to participate in our communities. So disability, we know over time and still today, often triggers a specific social reaction. And again, most of those social reactions to disability, unfortunately, are often negative, or they're based on untrue or false assumptions. And what stigma is getting into, it ties into that these social reactions or assumptions that we have about disability can be steeped in prejudice, whether we recognize it or not. And again, whether we intend to or not, can result in discrimination against people with disabilities. It's also important to unpack privilege. So privilege in Latin means law for just one. Privilege also means a benefit beyond what's readily available to others. It can mean a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available to only a particular person or group. And so in our society, we recognize that non-disabled people, so people who do not have disabilities, have privilege because of ableism in our society. An ableist belief system is one that assumes that people with disabilities are inferior to non-disabled people. An ableist belief system treats non-disabled people as the quote unquote standard of normal living. And again, ableism often works hand in hand alongside negative attitudes, stereotypes, and stigma towards people with disabilities. Next, we have tokenism. And tokenism is, again, a really important concept for us to unpack in understanding the social context in which people with disabilities live every day. So tokenism means making only a perfunctory or symbolic effort to do a particular thing, especially by recruiting a small number of people from underrepresented groups in order to give the appearance of equality. So we recognize that unfortunately, still today, people with disabilities are among these underrepresented groups that are often brought into decision-making, positions of power, or leadership positions when it is convenient for non-disabled people, or when it makes an organization or brand maybe look or feel better or good about themselves. And lastly, we have savior complex. So savior complex refers to a state of mind or actions in which an individual believes that they are responsible for saving or assisting others. Often this help is perceived by others to be self-serving more than it is to be serving others. And so we might have been hearing about savior complex in terms of white saviorism and in the context of racism and racial injustice, but we often don't talk about non-disabled saviorism that also can occur. So there's also a phenomenon that has, again, occurred for many, many decades, that non-disabled people or people without disabilities, again, have this belief or assumption that they are responsible for quote unquote saving people with disabilities. And these are just some of, again, the topics that people with disabilities live in our society, and they are intertwined with their day-to-day lives. And we have to state here that disability etiquette, so just being maybe aware of these concepts or being aware of how to interact on a very basic level with people with disabilities, treating them with humanity and dignity, that etiquette does not necessarily equal disability inclusion. So if we want inclusive outcomes, we have to be deliberate with our actions. And since etiquette does not equal inclusion, what can we be doing if we want to make meaningful change? So in place of helping people, what if we change systems by working on these 4 areas listed below? Because if we truly believe that people with disabilities are equal members of our communities and that disability is a natural part of human variation and diversity, then we should just be ready to take real and meaningful action in our workplaces, our communities, and everywhere that we occupy spaces to build, again, more inclusive, accessible, equitable, and just societies. So that's a lot of words here. Again, we are focusing on this slide on accessibility, representation, inclusion, and equity. And these are a lot of areas to unpack. We encourage you to go and research and do your own education, your own self-education on these topics. We have some definitions here on accessibility, meaning the practice of making technology, policy, space, and culture optimal for as many people as possible. And this enhances our workplaces and our communities for everyone. Representation would mean having a range of people with various racial, socioeconomic, and cultural backgrounds with various lifestyles and lived experiences authentically represented in our communities, in leadership positions, in our workplaces. And inclusion is the involvement and empowerment where the inherent worth and dignity of all people are recognized, which sustains a sense of true belonging. And lastly, equity is access, opportunity, and advancement for all, while striving to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of some groups in our society. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ashley, who is going to help us apply and really reflect on what we've explored together in this session. So back over to Ashley.
Thank you, Allie. So as Allie mentioned, we will spend the last moments that we have together really starting to move forward with a different expanded understanding and really just having a better idea of what exactly it is we can be doing and how we can focus our efforts. So a few things when we work with community partners and organizations, even friends and family members that ask us, what can we be doing differently? Specifically, give us some examples and ideas. First and foremost, it's really, really important for us to work on elevating our language, whether we are individual allies, it could be an employee resource group, it could be an entire organization or a brand, but making sure that the language that we use when we are describing people with disabilities, disability employment, anything related to, folks, whether it be in the workplace or in our communities, it's really, really important that we're mindful of the way that we label and describe people, and even the way that we label and describe ourselves in our relationship to people with disabilities as well. Next, we want to expand our mind on what we believe is valuable. For far too long, people with disabilities have been excluded from a number of different things because they are perceived as not being able to participate in a way that contributes to society or contributes to workplaces in the same ways that people with disabilities, without disabilities can. The thing is, people with disabilities contribute in a number of ways as folks without disabilities. But the thing is, people with disabilities also have found ways to be able to compete and live life and succeed in communities that are not built for folks to be successful or to be accessible. And so realistically, on top of being able to be poets and writers and leaders and all the things that we talked about earlier in the session, folks with disabilities oftentimes have different perspectives. They have different ways of doing things, right? We're all different. And so making sure that we don't expect people with disabilities to show up as though they don't have disabilities, but rather we create space for new ways of things being accomplished and being done. And we really start to challenge our mindset on what we believe is valuable. Next up, we want to raise society's standards. So again, if we pause and reflect on the ways that we've learned about disability, the things that we've learned along the way, the things that have been reinforced along the way, a lot of the language that is used is problematic or harmful. And so ensuring that not only are we changing what we say and what we do, but also that we are carrying that message forward in the spaces that we occupy. So it could be if you're a person who goes to a gym, it could be, if you are a person who is a part of a faith community, wherever and however that looks for you in your life, really having important conversations with the people that are around you in everyday life, because we all have so much work to do in order for our communities to be truly accessible and inclusive. And lastly, advocating for change. So Allie talked a little bit about that, framing the idea that rather than perceiving non-disabled people as folks who need to help people with disabilities, what if we leaned into power and privilege in order to create necessary change in our communities? So again, in the ways that the spaces that we occupy, in the spheres that we influence, in the arenas that we have a lot of knowledge about. If you are a person who works in finance, or let's say you work in IT, you have a different degree of knowledge in specific areas that you could then start to lean into, better understand, and advocate for change as well. So we like to ask folks, based on just 4 examples, how can you create space for inclusion in your workplace? In closing, disability is a part of life. And as we talked about earlier, it's simply natural human variation. It's on us as individual allies to choose actions that reflect that belief and that truth. We want to thank our premier sponsors for, as always, supporting the work that we do and making these community partner workshops possible. And with that, we will leave you with just some contact information in case you have any follow-up questions or would like to continue the dialogue with Allie and I. Thank you so much for joining us today.